Morning, Facebook fans. Live here in Saratoga County, New York, along this beautiful marsh area. We're banding some birds. I know you were watching a little bit before, got to see the ducks coming up, and now, after we've netted them, Josh Stiller here and his wonderful crew of techs are going to band these birds. So Josh, why don't you tell our folks, why do we band birds here in New York?
All right, so around the state, we band about 8,000 birds. It gives us a lot of really important information on survival and harvest rates. Obviously, wood ducks, mallards, they're two of the most important harvested species that we hunt. And this is an effort not just in New York. We ban birds as part of a collaborative effort with Canada, all the states around us. It's just a really large effort that's really important to really understanding how populations change, what survival's like, and obviously the impacts of harvest, like I said.
Nice.
So,
now, Josh, some astute Facebook watchers may realize that you've done this before here in this location. Last time you were actually wearing a face mask, but now we have these face shields and gloves. Can you explain why we're doing this year?
Yeah, so this has nothing to do with COVID. The reason we're wearing these are just for high-path avian influenza and just to be extra cautious. Right now, we don't have any active outbreaks that we're aware of. We're kind of constantly surveilling for these diseases. Anytime you or someone in the public experiences a couple birds dying, feel free to call our wildlife offices, and we're always interested to investigate. But this is just an extra precaution, just to make sure we're not getting anything in our eyes, in our mouth, and obviously on our hands, just because we're handling these birds. So. All
right, so we got our safety precautions in place for HPAI. Now let's get to banding these birds. So what are the first things you do when you get banding?
So first thing we do is the net goes off. We all come out there. It's just, there's a lot going on. That's why we cut the feed for a second. Get them out of the net and put them in these crates with some hay just to dry them out, because wet feathers are not a good thing for birds. So we just make sure they're in nice dry hay. Separate them by species usually just to make it a little easier. This morning we had two different species of ducks out there. We had mallards and wood ducks that came in this morning. And we were able to catch about 15 or 20 birds. And so we're going to start with the wood ducks here and just give you an idea of what we're looking for and how we age and sex them. So right here, I can tell you right away that this is a male. You see this nice red eye that it has? That's the kind of distinct feature that gives away what it is, even though overall this bird doesn't have a lot of distinct plumage that it'll have later in the year, but that red eye is really obvious on these birds. So let's just check. The thing that we usually look for with age are these tail feathers that are missing on this bird, so that is not going to be as helpful. So we have to move on to other characteristics. Tail feathers are molting. They're constantly molting feathers. This bird, you can see this kind of dark turquoise color is extending up into this third row of feathers here on the wing. Aging and sexing is all something that takes a lot of time and practice, but this is actually an adult male that we're going to band here. That's also the reason that it probably doesn't have these feathers, because it's replacing these tail feathers, or retrices as they're called. So I'm going to hand this bird back to you, and I'm going to put a band on it. Each of these bands, they're made out of aluminum. It's just a small band, has no impact on the bird, and it has a unique 9-digit number, so no other duck in the country has this same number as this duck that we're putting it on right now. And we feed this into a database that is national, run by the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. And they keep track of that. So if you encounter a band, whether you're a hunter, you find a dead bird, or you're a photographer who has a really good camera, sometimes you can get a picture of the entire band. You can actually go on reportband.gov and report that band, and it'll tell you, you'll get a certificate back in email, and it'll tell you where that bird was banded, approximately how old it is. Ducks and geese can live a really long time. I mean, geese, I think there are some records over 30 years old, and that's just since it was banded, so some of those might be even older than that. So now that bird, we got to make sure that goes to the person taking the data. So Amanda's taking data for us. So we're going to record the species, the age, and the sex, and the band number, and then we're going to let that bird go.
So Josh, what's the oldest bird that you've recaptured or that we know has been caught?
That's a good question. I mean, for ducks, I want to say like the longevity records are somewhere in like the 18-year range for like a mallard. Don't quote me on that. That's my ballpark. I know it's over 15 years. So they can live a long time, but survival is about 50 to 60%. So unfortunately, a lot of them don't live a long time. But because of this banding data, we know about how long they live.
And how many times a year are we banding birds throughout the state?
So we band during the preseason window, is what we call this right now, which is August to September, and that's right before hunting seasons. And then we also typically have a lot of, or sometimes have postseason banding projects where we put on bands during the winter time. It's a lot easier to catch ducks during the winter time because right now there's a lot of food out there, so it's a little bit more of a struggle. And so we'll usually band about 2,500 ducks this time of year during this 2-month window. So this bird right here is a female, because you can see it has a brown eye instead of a red eye. And then the tail, this is what a juvenile bird's tail feather looks like. You can see how there's this notch right here that's broken out of the feather. Just a weak point in the feather that ends up breaking off on a juvenile bird. She's really small in general too. You can see some juvenile plumage in the face as well. So that's how we know this is a juvenile bird. And it's a female because of the color of the eye.
So for those of you just tuning in, we are live here in Saratoga County, New York, banding birds along the Mohawk River corridor here with Josh Stiller and our awesome team of wildlife techs. So Josh, tell us a little bit more about what this data that we collect is used for.
Yeah, so I mean, around the state, the New York State and a lot of the other states and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service work together collaboratively. Waterfowl, unlike something like a turkey where it only matters to New York, you know, our turkey populations are only affected in New York by New Yorkers. For ducks, because they're migratory, we're affecting ducks all up and down the flyway. New York is a really important state for a lot of these species, because pretty much everything that occurs in the Atlantic Flyway comes through New York. And so we work together using this data to develop strategies for harvesting them at sustainable levels so that we're not negatively impacting their populations. And that's really the key for this data. You know, it gives us information on, it gives us information on where they go, and things like that. But usually if we want to know where they go specifically and how they're moving across the landscape, we typically rely now on some of the newer technologies like cellular transmitters that give you GPS coordinates and can give you hourly locations and really fine scale information. And that's part of that Mallard research project we're doing throughout the Atlantic Flyway from South Carolina to the Maritimes of Canada. We're putting out over 1,000 transmitters on female mallards to learn more about productivity, survival. Same types of questions, just differing scales that we're looking at it and differing levels of detail that we get. So this is one that can trick a lot of people into thinking it's a female, but it's actually a male. It's a juvenile male with a little bit of red in its eyes. You can see on the juvenile male, it's not quite as red as it is on the adult male that we had before. But another reason we know this is a juvenile is because of those tail feathers again, are all notched and broken. So this time of year, that's a really reliable trait. As we get into September, even the juvenile birds will molt those feathers. And so that isn't as reliable. So we'll start looking at other things. If we had any uncertainty as to what the age and sex was, we would actually flip the bird over and you can pop the cloaca and you can see whether or not it's a male or a female from that. But it's not really necessary in a lot of these because there's a lot of other traits that tell us what the age and sex is.
So good morning, Facebook fans. Once again, we are live banding birds here in Saratoga County. My name is Sean Mahar. I'm the Executive Deputy Commissioner here for DEC. Happy to be joining with our crew today. Pretty cool science that we're doing here. We're going to interview our staff a little bit more about what got them into doing work like this for DEC. It's really cool to see the awesome careers and jobs that you can have here at DEC, really helping to drive the science that drives our decision making to make our environment a better place. So it's a really great day. We were just banding some wood ducks here. We're going to move on to some mallard ducks. So let's check out if the next one we can grab out of the box here. And Josh can tell us a little bit more about mallards. So I guess, Josh, why don't you tell us what got you into doing this work for DEC?
Well,
Now, I don't really know what we're going to do about that. But this is science,
that one down.
And it happens. And now the rest of the world knows that even the pros have a bad morning at the office sometimes. Shake it off, shake it off. It's going to be okay. You are not.
I won't let this one go.
But you can blame me, of course. See, I'm here today, not used to being here with you. And it's okay, Josh.
I'm going to have some messages for that one. I know that's,
you will.
That's already
But listen, it is still all science. So the one that got away, we are going to ban the rest of them here, though. So talk a little bit more about what got you into this and why you chose this as a career for DEC.
So I've kind of always been interested in waterfowl. Ever since I was a kid, I have pictures of myself at Montezuma and Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge sitting on my dad's shoulders, looking at ducks. We'd go on a family trip and go out there every year and watch the spring migration, and that really got me interested in ducks and got interested in hunting, got interested in kind of how we manage these species. Did my grad school at ESF at Syracuse, and really just enjoy working with game animals. I've kind of worked in a couple different roles in DEC, working on Long Island and then now in our central office here. So that's kind of my background. So now we're looking at a mallard. This is another one. This time of year, they can really trick people into thinking there's something that they're not. This is a male that's in eclipse plumage, so it's not in its breeding plumage with its bright green head. But you can see it still has a yellow bill. It does kind of have a saddle like this black mark that a hen would have, but it's not as defined. And another way that we know that this is a male is looking at this white bar here. If this was a female, it would extend out into, these are called the tertial feathers, these thick feathers right here that aren't colored. And this white bar would keep extending out. So we know that this is a male, and then we're going to flip it over and look and check to see if it is a juvenile, and it is. So same thing that happens with the wood ducks. Those feathers are all notched and frayed, and so those are juvenile feathers. So this bird was just born this spring, sometime in May, June, probably May or June because he's pretty far along. So that's all we need from him. Mallards are a species that in the northeast U.S. have declined a little bit, but they still have really large populations, over 1 million birds.
Here, let me help you with this one, just to make sure we get it done right this time.
Yeah, so that's why DEC and there's about 20 partners on that project are exploring, trying to learn more about what is potentially affecting mallard populations and their decline. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there as I'm getting ready.
That's fine. You got important work to do here with banding these birds. So, Josh, one of the questions we had from our viewers just now was, how far away have we found one of the birds that we've banded here in New York State?
So we can have them all the way down. Most of our birds stay in the Atlantic flyway, which is basically a straight line down.
Florida.
Maine to Florida, right along the coast, all the coastal states, and to West Virginia is about as far west as it goes. So most of these birds are going to end up in there. We get random birds that end up somewhere else, but it's not super typical. But birds have wings, so you can have birds show up anywhere. But
now, do we find them north into Canada at all as well?
We can. Typically, these birds, there could be some movement going on right now during the preseason banding window. Birds like maybe moving in from Canada. So again, people look at migration and think of it as, well, that doesn't happen until December, or that doesn't happen until January. But in reality, migration is happening pretty much constantly. There's few windows where no birds are moving around. This is another good example. So this is another male, even though it's even has some orange in the bill, but you can still see it's yellow as well. So this is a juvenile male. Yep. This is a juvenile male because that white doesn't extend into there. It has a little bit of a yellow bill, and it has these notched tail feathers. So.
All right. So the bird we're banding today gets its own unique marker. We record that data, and it goes into a national database, you said?
Correct. And then you can report it if you harvest it or find it at some point. Something I didn't mention with wood ducks, I mean, that's one of kind of the great success stories in wildlife management. Wood ducks at one point were on the brink. They had declined significantly for a long time. And then, through a lot of conservation efforts, wood duck boxes and just habitat restoration. They've been restricting harvest, things like that. They really came back, and they're now actually the #1 harvested duck in the entire Atlantic flyway. And they actually replaced mallards, were historically the most harvested species in the Atlantic flyway, but that has since changed. So
So for those of you tuning in live again, we're here banding ducks along the Atlantic Flyway here in the capital region of New York State. Really cool, great experience to see this happen today. And again, contributing to a lot of the science that underpins the great work we do here at DEC. I know some of you have been wondering why we're wearing face masks and gloves today. Again, HPAI, or highly pathogenic avian influenza, is around the state right now, and we are taking extra precautions to make sure we are not spreading these to other birds. And Josh is having some difficulties here today.
evidently, now the string broke for absolutely no reason.
Happens to the best of us.
All right.
So Josh, where do we get these bands from?
Yeah, so again, these come from that national database. We order these bands through the through the USGS and the bird banding lab. There's a bird banding lab in the United States and a bird banding office in Canada, and they kind of keep this inventory. Because obviously, again, birds don't recognize boundaries, so they'll migrate to Canada. They get harvested in Canada. So we have a really good working relationship with all these different state and federal agencies in both Canada, the United States. The flyway that we work in extends into the Caribbean, so we actually have participation from a number of different countries that all have a vested stake in the management of these birds. Like blue-winged teal are arriving right now in August and into September, and those birds migrate all the way down into the tropics and even down to the Yucatan and other places farther south. So, you know, everything we do, I can't stress that enough, is anything we do in New York affects a whole bunch of other states, and that's why this huge collaborative effort, there really aren't many examples like it as there are for waterfowl management. It's a really neat experience to see all these different agencies work together to manage these species, because it couldn't be done without everyone kind of chipping in and doing these efforts like banding thousands of birds. So
I know a number of our viewers are very interested in helping out. Are there ways that people can volunteer to help us do work like this or get involved in their community?
So for duck banding, it's a little bit more tricky. We do usually have some opportunities for goose banding, which happens when the birds are flightless earlier in the year. It's definitely more conducive to that type of volunteer work. So yeah, there are some opportunities potentially, but it really depends on where people are located and if there's something close by.
What more would you recommend people do for wildlife in their backyards, or for ducks and other waterfowl?
So for ducks, it really depends. I mean, there's a lot of federal programs if you own property. There's a lot of great non-government organizations that can help steer you to the right federal programs and state programs that can help put habitat on the ground, because really, for most species, it's all about putting habitat on the ground. You know, we manage their population through harvest, but a lot of it is limited by habitat and just how much food is out there. So anything you can do and natural foods. I mean, artificial foods are not a good thing for any wildlife, especially ducks. It can cause nutritional deficiencies. You know, we're feeding corn. This is just supplemental. They're feeding on all kinds of stuff. This is a really nice wetland with lots of wild, natural duck foods in it. So, but in general, you want to avoid feed and just create habitat. So that requires owning land and stuff like that. But if you have it, there's a lot of programs out there to help fund that work, which is a great thing to see. So really important since that band string
Exactly, and just this year we made some great progress with the New York State Legislature on enacting a new wetland conservation law in the state, which is going to help us protect even more wetlands here in New York. There's definitely more information on our DEC website, so always check back there for what you can do to learn more about our wildlife conservation efforts, our waterfowl conservation efforts, our habitat protection efforts, and all that we're doing every day on the front lines of conservation here in New York State. But really, when it comes to the front lines, science is what underpins what we do here at DEC every day. And it's great experts like Josh and the talented team of wildlife techs that we have with us here today that are contributing to the science that is driving the conservation work that we do day in and day out. And it's really an awesome opportunity to be out here on this beautiful summer morning And I'm glad that you could be joining with us as we ban more of these mallards here in New York. So Josh, what's your favorite duck species?
That's a good question. That's a tough one. It depends. I did my grad work on common mergansers. They're a species that a lot of people don't like because they eat fish. But they're a really neat prehistoric looking bird. So,
They are awesome.
And they are relatively understudied compared to a lot of ducks. So I'm pretty partial to mergansers, but there's a lot of ducks that are really neat. In New York, we have we have the luxury of having really diverse habitats, everything from like these coastal areas where we have all of the sea ducks that happen in the Atlantic flyway that occur. You can experience those. So I really like eiders as well. They're pretty
Eiders,
neat
yeah.
bird. And we're starting to have more and more of them on Long Island. But we'll just go over one last one since we haven't covered the female. So this is a female mallard. You can see this orange bill. Looks like she had a little bit of as her bill formed, was deformed a little bit. Now we're going to see her wing, and this is where we can see that white bar extends out over to these feathers. So you can tell that that's a female. This is also a juvenile because she's got notched feathers. It's very common for a lot of our banding sites to get a lot of juvenile birds. So we got the band on her, so just check with that. And
So how are waterfowl populations doing overall in New York State, would you say?
they're doing great. We had some that, mallards are a prime example of a bird that a couple of years ago we had to restrict harvest. Then COVID hit and our monitoring streams took a little bit of a hit, but we're back and doing full banding efforts, full surveys. So we should have a lot better handle. We're hopeful, and it appears that we're going in a good direction in terms of mallards. And I'm sure our harvest regulations played into that, and just hopefully we can see more opportunity for them in the future. We'll kind of see where that goes. Like I said, wood ducks are a great success story for wildlife conservation. I mean, they have very robust populations at this point. They're doing great. With a lot of species, Canada geese. This is a hard one that we have to explain all the time of how we manage Canada geese, because it's really hard to parse out that we manage migratory and resident populations for those, because we have this huge population of geese that don't migrate any farther than they have to in New York. Resident is kind of a misnomer because they do migrate. They'll go into southern Canada, they'll go into Maryland, they'll move around a couple states, but they're not like our true migratory geese that are coming from northern Canada, in Quebec. And those birds are traveling over 1,000 miles to get down here. And those birds are really sensitive to harvest. We have to be very careful. That's why our seasons are so conservative for geese in a lot of cases, because they're a bird that's heavily reliant on good productivity. And when weather isn't good, and as you know, we have weather patterns that are changing, and so it affects their productivity. We have years where they don't reproduce at all, and then we have years that are really great. But they're another population that's starting to respond to our changes in harvest regulations, and hopefully in the future soon we'll be able to have more opportunity for them. But overall, populations of most species are doing great. I mean, we regulate these birds, and we manage them in a way to make sure that their populations are always doing well. That's why we put so much effort into this. I mean, there's a lot of resources being spent here to ensure that their populations remain high, so that for people who just like viewing them, they can see them. For the people who like hunting them, they can have that opportunity. We manage them for everybody.
Yep, and this is great. Well, we know we got a couple more birds here to do. We don't want to keep you all this morning, but let's get this last one done. Let's take us through step by step again how we approach it. Now, Josh, for those of you who may be tuning in, we had a little mishap earlier today. So we're going to go start to finish now of banding a bird. I will grab this bird for you, Josh, just so we get it done right now, because you showed me how to do this from the expert way. All right, we have a mallard duck here, one of our resident species here in New York State. So again, Josh, first step is to identify the sex and age of the bird, correct?
Yes, that is the first step as we're trying to band it, because my string busted everywhere. I'm trying to find the next one in the string because they're sequentially numbered.
Now, Facebook fans, I got to say, this is probably one of the coolest days in the office so far, being able to see one of our awesome wildlife species here in the state up close, helping to contribute to science, hanging out with great experts like Josh, who are on the front lines of helping manage our species here in New York State. So, sex of this bird is?
So this is going to be a male. It's yellow there. there. We're going to pull out this wing, and again, you can see that that white line stops as soon as you get to these bigger feathers that aren't colored. This is called the speculum. Any type of dabbling duck or a duck you'd find in a marsh typically has this colored speculum. It's like a metallic sheen to it. There's all kinds of different colors depending on what species it is. But on a mallard, they have these two double white bars too. I didn't mention that. That's kind of one of the key distinguishing features between that and a black duck, which is a species that looks very similar to these, but is very different.
Now, I've heard that black ducks and mallards are hybridizing. Is that true?
So they do hybridize. They're one of there are a bunch of duck species that can actually successfully hybridize and still be fertile. You know, with most other species, they can't hybridize and then have fertile offspring. So there's I think there's like 56 different species a mallard can interbreed with. I don't know how many of those are actually fertile, but it's something that through genetics work, there's a researcher at El Paso, I think he is at, who has done a lot of genetics work with mallards and black ducks, and we've kind of come to the conclusion, that was a concern for a long time, is that mallards were going to hybridize black ducks out of existence in the Atlantic flyway, but through genetics we've learned that that is not happening right now, so that's good news.
Now, Josh, these bands are lightweight, right? So they have no impact on the bird's ability to fly or anything else?
Nope. This is about a 2-gram band, and it has no impact. We make sure that it can spin freely on their legs, so it's not hurting them. It's all rounded off and soft, and as it gets older, it's just going to get softer. So it's not going to have any impact on the bird's leg at all, and that's why we use it, because if it did have an impact potentially on survival, it potentially biases the information that you're getting from it. So we want to avoid that at all costs.
All right, so Josh, we've banded this mallard duck. We're going to record some quick data, then we're going to release it. So Facebook fans, come with us. We'll do a quick bird release here.
Did I keep them in order?
No. What was the age?
It is juvenile.
This is a juvenile mallard duck. Again, you can tell by the characteristics and markings of the feathers. So now, once it's banded, we've recorded the data. We're going to let it go free. Josh, come with me. We can try and do this together.
Best way, I would just put it down and let it should jump right out of your hands.